It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you John Eason. John is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Before going to Madison, he was in the Sociology Department at Texas A&M University, and we overlapped briefly as when he was a postdoc at Duke University. John received his PhD in Sociology from Chicago, and now there we didn't overlap because he's a much later PhD, so he's much younger than me. And John's work intersects the issue of spatial demography and space arrangements and its connection with health, prisons, racial and ethnic inequalities. I think he's one of the leading demographers and social demographers that study in rural areas, and rural areas have been highly impacted by the expansion of the prison industry, and it directly connects with immigration because the new population that are being in prison are actually immigrants, and its effects on health and disparities is an important topic for us. So without any further ado, please help me welcome John.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. This may be a little retread for a couple of you, but I've been in a conversation by myself for quite some time, so I have to catch some of you up to speed. And I want to start by thanking Emilio for inviting me and allowing me to speak, but also let you know that it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here at the Penn Population Study Center. I'd also like to acknowledge the hard work of Dawn Ryan and the other staff to tolerate the eccentric peculiarities of faculty and help keep us in compliance with the bureaucracies of our universities. I always have to acknowledge the staff folks that work with us. So while sociologists are expected to provide critical analysis, there always seems to be a tacit expectation that as our work is translated for the public, it may offer prescriptive reforms that reduce inequality. In other words, we are implicitly asked to offer solutions with an eye towards a hopeful future. This is especially difficult for a professionally certified and world-renowned curmudgeon like myself. Given that many of you in this room are skilled or budding sociologists and are quite adept at identifying problems, I believe we can all agree that we are not so good at identifying, let alone offering solutions. So whether or not you agree with our ability to offer solutions, we can certainly all agree that collectively we are quite terrible as a source of inspiration and hope to address social problems. In fact, as a scholar of punishment, race, and inequality, I often speak to rooms where I see faces turn to despair as I present my evidence. While completing my first book a few years ago, I did not believe we could do much to reverse the tide of mass incarceration. However, I've found a new inspiration from the solution-based scholarship that I've been reading recently, and in retreading through some of my older work. I found this good news while pondering the keen insights provided by a key informant, John Alderson, where he argued that if we could cite a high-tech non-polluting facility that pays $100 grand a year instead of a prison, we would have. Heck, I've got the land, I'll sell it to them. But those facilities weren't exactly lining up to come to places like Forest City, Arkansas. My presentation today is a compilation of academic and public pieces that recap my research agenda with an eye towards my next book project, tentatively entitled In Our Backyards: How the Prison Boom Transformed Rural America. I'll highlight quantitative analysis of two papers that are central to the second book. But first, the first portion of my presentation is primarily from a recent piece entitled Prisons in the Rural Ghetto, appearing in the fall issue of Dissent magazine. This piece serves as a bridge between my first book and policy implications I'll discuss in my next. Prison construction requires more than concrete and stone. Given the history of racial and economic exploitation of this peculiar institution, some are convinced blood and bodies form the bedrock, making the prison the ultimate form of racial and economic exploitation in the US. Many are certain prison building is a corrupt political process rife with blood money from privatization. This view is supported in part by the exponential increase in US corrections spending over the past 5 decades. The standard story explaining prison proliferation is that private prison operators hold perverse incentives to increase mass incarceration for profit. The same profit motives driving private prison privatization is also believed to be the impetus behind the prison boom, the tripling of US prison facilities since 1970. Given this proliferation during the purported post-racial era, there is a consensus that the modern prison is interchangeable with other forms of racial oppression like slavery, Jim Crow, and convict leasing. Brian Stevens, a modern civil rights leader and inspiration behind the blockbuster film, I don't know if any of you have seen this, Just Mercy. He recently claims that slavery doesn't end, it just evolves. Stevenson has personally overturned 135 wrongful convictions, freeing scores of innocent, poor, and people of color from the clutches of death row. Given his accomplishment, his claim of slavery not ending cannot be taken lightly, let alone dismissed out of hand. While I agree with the sentiments and tone of the righteous anger explicit in his claim, in many ways, this type of thinking denies the victories social movements of Black folks have already achieved against past racial systems of oppression. Victories that can be used as an example of high-level coordination of collective action and the fortitude needed to muster the perseverance to end the carceral state, mass incarceration, and the other forms of modern punishment, including but not limited to mass supervision, monetary sanctions, and the prison book. As a community and political organizer for then Illinois State Senator Barack Obama on the South Side of Chicago, I also held the view that prison building was a corrupt political process rife with blood money from privatization. However, as I relocated my family to rural Arkansas to uncover why rural communities were increasingly demanding prisons, I would be disavowed of this notion. This view of prison building is rooted in an urban northern bias, rendering rural places powerless, especially communities of color. Prison building is a complex process, complicating much of what we understand about the political, social, and economic life of rural communities. I came to learn this soon after meeting folks like Coach Cecil Twilley, pictured here, a proud man who always had a glimmer in his eye, as if he knew something that you didn't, and he was itching to tell you, but only if you asked very nicely. Coach was a pioneer in Forest City, Arkansas, in the Mississippi Delta. He integrated the local school board and administration. He was the first Black member of the local country club, the first Black head coach after desegregation of the public school in the town where they named the private school, Robert E. Lee, in the town that's named after the founder of the KKK, and the last high school football coach to win the Arkansas State Championship nearly 50 years ago. This feat is why he still was affectionately known as Coach in the predominantly Black rural town of 14,863. Forest City is also home to about 1,900 prisoners located in the Forest City Federal Correctional Facility, the FCFCF, that was constructed in 1997. Contrary to popular belief, my empirical analysis demonstrates towns with higher poverty rates and Black and Latino populations are more likely to build a prison. Now these data I collected were used to use a mixed method approach to write my book and to pick the case study of Forest City. As an early supporter of the Forest City Federal Correctional Facility, Coach elucidates why he welcomed a hideously stigmatized institution like a prison when he explained, "I don't want my town to end up like Gary." During the 1990s, Gary, Indiana became the butt of many jokes as it competed annually for the infamous title of US murder capital. And this is downtown Gary, circa 2006. And every time I do this, I keep replacing this picture, but I don't know if you can read the marquee, who's playing that night. This is about 2006. It says the Jackson Five are appearing tonight. Some of you may be too young to know what that means, but yeah. This is downtown Forest City, circa 2007. And like Gary and countless other deindustrializing American cities, Forest City had faced racial stigma and uneven and underdevelopment. And recalling life before the prison came, one resident noted that several plants and other major employers were closing. And he described things as tough, just tough. Coach's quip about trying to keep his town from ending up like Gary is a way to frame the prison as a means of saving Forest City's reputation. The comparison of Forest City to Gary indicated the town's downward trajectory because of the rise of the rural ghetto, a neighborhood marked by the stigma of Black concentrated poverty. Coach's quip also offers a counterintuitive insight about why rural communities that used to respond with NIMBY, or not in my backyard, now say PIMBY, or please in my backyard. These site fights or debates over community opposition and supportive facilities with harmful environmental effects have been documented by scholars like Robert Bullard, who advocate for policies to reverse climate change. As I argue in my first book, Big House on the Prairie, Rise of the Rural Ghetto and Prison Proliferation, covering from stigma from the rise of the rural ghetto was essential to a reputation management strategy driving the campaign to win placement of the prison. And this is my theoretical model of not in my backyard to please in my backyard, where Coach's response demonstrates the agency of middlemen, Black leaders operating between what Mary Patillo labels as the little man and the man, and partnering with white elites to secure development. Coach was not the only one. The future mayor, then city council representative and president of the local NAACP chapter, Larry Bryant, also supported prison development. When asked why he supported the prison, Andre Stevens, executive director of the local NGO, St. Francis County Community Development Corporation, and Black middleman, he's pictured here with his wife, Terry, to his immediate, it would be your left. He exclaimed, "A prison beats the hell out of a paper mill." Desperate towns seeking industry to help stabilize their economies like Forest City are not blessed with a wealth of options. A prison may be the most environmentally responsible option for towns like Forest City, given their history of uneven development and challenges in attracting new business development. Options littered with Lulus or locally undesirable land uses, including paper mills, garbage dumps, incinerators, and a host of industries linked to cancer-causing agents and greenhouse gases. These toxic facilities are most likely to be located in poor and minority communities. Prisons are Lulus, yet they have an additional racial stigma because of mass incarceration. Despite acknowledging that mass incarceration disproportionately affects their communities, Black leaders in Forest City supported the prison coming to town. In fact, in a town that is known for political divisions along racial lines, Black leaders were unified with the local white elites in supporting the prison, given the constraints posed by the rise of the rural ghetto. In a competitive global economy, a prison became the best of the worst options available for struggling communities like Forest City. And while many believe prison building is overwhelmingly a private venture, roughly only 13% of all US prisons are privately owned and operated. This popular notion of privatization is understandable given the ubiquity of the prison. The United States is unique among rich countries in the world in its level of contemporary mass incarceration, a massive social change that has reshaped the nature of inequality. In fact, a recent study shows that more than half of all Americans have a family member or know someone who is incarcerated. And mass incarceration refers to the 2.2 million people who are incarcerated, right? And while this massive social problem receives attention as a major barrier to racial and economic justice in urban centers, we rarely consider that the rural communities are both senders and receivers of prisons. And prison proliferation, rural communities simultaneously suffer from mass incarceration and warehousing of millions of people, and the prison boom, the tripling of facilities, right? And while 70% of these facilities were built in rural communities, and they employ 450,000 corrections officers, 10 times the number of coal jobs, and occupy a landmass of roughly 600 square miles. That's about half the size of Rhode Island. Rhode Island isn't a big state, but it is a state, just to give you an idea of how big this landmass is. And by a conservative estimate, at least $30 million to build, this public works project has transformed the American countryside virtually unnoticed. Another little tidbit I want to throw in here is that many believe that mass incarceration is distinctly a Black urban phenomenon. Since 2000, rural and quite separately, white communities are sending more people to prison in record numbers. In addition to that, a study done in 2000 showed that a third of corrections officers were people of color, right? So this is very complicated when it comes to race and inequality. And we need to, if we're going to slow the expansion of punishment in rural communities, we need to combat the consequences of mass incarceration and rural communities' growing dependence on prison building. So I won't get into this whole macro thing. I can come back to this, but I study neighborhoods and communities, but this is like basically a reworked Chicago school understanding of neighborhoods. But I do want to show you this. This is for a city. I dig up this old map for presentations because it's easier to do. It literally shows the hills where white people live in blue, and then the red is where Black people, this is where Black people live. This is hyper segregated, right? This is in 2000. About a third, these are housing developments. So orange dots, that's about a third of a square mile where there's 6 housing developments. So the poverty rate went from 50% in 1970 to 33% in 2000, but the number of people, the ratio of Black people in poverty went from 40% to 80%, right? So it's hyper segregated. And I'm gonna skip ahead now. Got to get to plantations. So I could go on and on about Forest City forever and what it teaches us, but I want to show you guys a couple of the papers I'm working on now that sit within this framework, and really trying to complicate and nuance the historical legacy of racism as it relates to prisons, and also think about the political economy of places that built prisons. So here are 3 questions I'm going to deal with. The 3 questions I'm going to deal with in this plantations to prison. Went too fast. There we go. It keeps doing it. Good God, I hate when it does this. 1, 2, 3. It won't do it. I didn't even touch it that time. I don't know what happened there. The final question is, does the proportion of slaves in the county in 1860 predict prison building after the boom? And so let's see if this will stay. Oh, it's gone back again. Oh, there you go. Those are the 3 questions dealt with in this paper now. Let's see what happens with this. I'm not touching anything. Oh, okay. When it did it on its own, I did not set these things this way. I don't know how that happened, but okay, these are the findings. And so I want to tell you why this is so important. Part of what clouds our view of prison building is the farm at Angola. The farm is a former slave plantation that now operates as a prison. This is a state-owned and operated facility in Louisiana that is used to symbolize what is wrong with private prisons. Again, this is a state-owned and operated facility used to demonstrate what is wrong with private prisons. There's a movie about this. They literally have a farm where they pay inmates pennies on the dollars. These are all death row inmates. There's a lot of problems here with the farm. And you see, this is the farm, the true history of American private prisons. This is a Time magazine piece from 1977. That looks a whole bunch like slavery to all of us, right? The imagery, this is from 1977. Then you put this image up, and this image is from the San Francisco Bay View. It's a local paper in San Francisco, and this is in 2016. This looks a whole lot like slavery. So if you see something like this, this is why people believe that prisons are slavery and they're privatized. But I had to edit our great social philosopher, Vince Staples. I don't think you guys get my dry sense of humor a little bit, but this isn't just for the kids. He says county bus slave ship, same ish. And if a rapper can reduce your theory to a single line, we may want to rethink our theories. Maybe that's just me. I've heard this not just from him. This goes all the way back to Public Enemy, but that's a whole other thing. I addressed the issue of private prisons versus privatization in an article in The Conversation. It was also picked up by Salon in the Chicago Tribune. And what I'm really trying to get at, and why I'm engaging in a public debate around this pervades the scholarship. So while the discursive connection can be useful for advocacy, empirical links must provide durable theory, and sound policy is critical steps if we're really going to decarcerate. We just can't have this conversation of advocacy. So here's the research design. I use IPUM's data, the slave data. The dependent variable is a county, and whether or not a county built a prison. I'm using a rare event logistic regression. Let's see if this goes by itself. See, this is, yeah. These are the county level controls. Yeah, see, that's how it was supposed to go. Population size, proportion slave, percent Black, poverty, rather parsimonious model, unemployment. I threw this odd looking graph up because I was so proud. I had my son meet Emilio last night. He's at Swarthmore. He took a class in R. I'm so excited about what R can do for graphics over Stata. I couldn't believe my R graph looked terrible. This is the predicted probability of prison building based on proportion slave in 1860, right? And here are some results. I'm still working through this paper. This paper is really giving me the fits because the percent Black post 1970 in the county is highly correlated with the proportion, with the number of slaves, with the proportion of slaves in the county in 1860. It's really giving me a fit. I'm trying different strategies as I work through this. But what I find is basically the proportion slave is positively correlated with prison building in the 80s, 90s, and 2000, and the proportion Black and poverty and the size of county is also positively correlated, as is prior prison. Now I have to give you some pause. So if you have fruit or food, those of you holding food, I don't want you to have a knee-jerk reaction and throw it at me, but proportion slave does not predict necessarily, it doesn't predict private prison building, right? I keep finding these counterintuitive results. I've explained to people, I've had data on prison building for years. It brings up PTSD every time I find results like this. It took me 5 years to publish that first paper. It took me 7 years to publish my second paper on prison impact because people do not like my results. You know who doesn't like my results? Me. I'm the Black guy getting these results. So people may think that in some ways I'm okay with prison building, and actually I'm not. And that's why I'm almost on the advocacy side, but I'm a social scientist, so I have to deal with the data, right? I don't like these results, and that's why I'm trying to figure any strategy around this. I don't think it's changing for private prisons. That's just kind of where it's at. And the US leads all developed countries with the highest rate of incarceration, yet it's ranked 113th in terms of capacity. I just grabbed this graphic off the line, right? We are not over capacity. People believe we have a bunch of private prisons and we've stuck people in there and we're just trying to make money. And that's not what's actually happening. California is not even top 5 in prison building, right? I always throw this fact out. Oklahoma has built more prisons than California. Of course, Texas is #1 in anything bad with punishment. Death row inmates, exonerees, prison building. But yeah, so I'll give you a second to breathe because I'm gonna do this in 4 minutes because I'd like to have a conversation. I had to set up the broader framework and let you guys know where a lot of the questions originate that I'm looking at now for my case study. But also, I think it gives you context and background for where I'm going next, because I often, if I don't do this, I have more questions and I don't get to really engage in the way I want to. This paper has been accepted at PAA. I am trying to go to PAA for the first time. I know I'm not a proper demographer because I haven't pledged my allegiance to PAA, but my co-author, Mary Campbell, will present it at PAA anyway, because I'll let her take the tomatoes. You're gonna be mad at this. I'm gonna tell you now, you're gonna be mad at this. So Mary and the grad students we've worked with at A&M have done a great job cleaning the data and prepping it. So I have to mention the prison boom, but I wanted to provide a visual representation from the perspective of rural communities. This is how many prisons were in rural communities up to 1970. This is how many we built since 1970 in rural communities, right? So here are my research questions. The clock in the back is a little slow too. It's throwing me off, but I want to make sure I wrap up in the next 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. Here are my research questions. No. Is it going to do it again? 1. See, these are appropriately planned. We're looking at the state level and local predictors of prison building. Here are my findings. That seems rather innocuous. No reason to throw tomatoes. You'll see why in a second. I could go through all the colors of punishment. Punishment is black for all the reasons already mentioned, slavery and everything else. Punishment is blue, policing. Half of Black men will be arrested by 18, 39% of white men by age 23, so policing, if we're thinking about as a form of punishment, punishment is blue. And punishment is also purple. That means that Democrats and Republicans have participated in building the penal industrial complex through the so-called war on drugs and the war on the poor, right? So I don't want to do all of these terms. I'm gonna go straight to, I could give you a whole bunch of terms, but I'll give you this. Prison siting is the push from the state, the political economy of the state, how that matters, and prison placement is the pull. And so here are my variables. Here are my variables for citing. These are all forms of, we looked at what's called surplus labor, surplus land, surplus capital, and then the political affiliation, and then the Gini coefficient. We're looking at income inequality and personal capital income. These are the place level demographics. So we created a disadvantage index, and then racial composition, population size, and prior prison. And this is where I start to check to make sure no one's throwing anything. So democratic strength, if you look at that, so the Gini coefficient matters, inequality matters, right? And this is time, this is a multi-level model. This is time nested in place, nested in state. And what we're finding is we didn't understand, because everyone else, when they look at incarceration, and they use Republican strength. When they look at the papers on mass incarceration, they use Republican strength. We kept getting negative or no results, so we had to flip it. And there's a reason for this that I can discuss. Is partly based on period. Democratic strength, this is mainly a Southern effect. So this is before the Southern state legislatures become fully Republican. They're still Democratic through the 90s. So I show the result, and then I try and explain to people, and people who are patient enough will look at that and understand it. And here's what happens at the place level. The percent Black matters, percent Latinx over periods. It goes back and forth depending on what we're looking at. I have more details on this as well, but I want to say one more thing before I get to, I want to say one more thing before I close. So this is how we should understand prison building from this perspective. And we've used a sort of neoliberal, hardcore prison industrial complex model, and I'm advocating for more, instead of just a Marxian approach, a more Bavarian approach, where we understand that these, the logics of institutions may not just be profit motives, right? There may be other logics going on here. And I will end there in 34 minutes. Thank you.
Questions?
So, can you possibly frame the positive impact of democratic political strength that local politicians are viewing this as a job growth, a job program? Is that your interpretation?
It's a public works facility, yes. It is, but it's also Southern, yeah, we were talking about the South. The South is, even when people are Democratic in the South, is a different kind of Democrat. And that period is different. So yes, it is about job growth, but it's the state is so absent in Southern communities, period. In rural communities, it is, there are places that don't have roads, okay? And there's, the degree of rurality is based on the type of roads you have. So just to give, I mean, basic stuff that we can take for granted. Sidewalks are a real luxury. I'm giving you, these are basic things that you take for granted in an urban center. They don't have infrastructure. So to get a public works facility like a prison is a big upgrade. It's not just about the jobs. I'd like to reduce it to that, but it has so many more meanings other than just jobs. Yes.
So thanks for a great talk. Two questions that I just wondered if you could speak to a little bit is sort of what the role of unions are. Like, are many of these, I know that, you know, in some places, prison jobs are kind of unionized, especially among correctional officers, and the way in which that might also play into local areas, and particularly unions playing a role in sort of trying to get these jobs in more rural spaces. And then the other question was about the role of the the census and counting these people in the spaces, because I know that also has implications for things like voting. Like if you're taking people who are in other rural spaces and putting them in ultra-urban spaces and then counting them in the census as that being their place of location, that can completely change voting dynamics and power dynamics and the extent to which politicians are privy to that or not.
Yes. So I put this map up because you see a lot of red in the South and a lot of right-to-work states. It gets better. I think the other map is better. So these are a lot of right-to-work states, and there are weird bedfellows. In the case of California with the unions, I've considered like revisiting some of Bruce Wester's work on union decline and its relation to prison building, but I haven't been able to work out how that story would go, because in California the prison union is 50,000, right? You're 50,000 corrections officers, and by comparison, the state of Illinois has 45,000 prisoners, right? So the bedfellows, the teachers union will get in bed with the prison union, and the teachers will lose out ultimately because they're always going to fund the prison stuff. So unionization, they're not so much, I can see they have to unionize after the prison was built, and a lot of these places are anti-union, where most of the prison buildings take place. So your second question was about
Sort of like how the census counts.
census. Yeah, so I was discussing this with Eason earlier because I'm trying to figure out, there's the census counting of the prisoners, but there's also, you're talking about political power. I'm thinking just the political economy of prisoners. So I discussed this in detail, I forget in my book, one of the impact that prisons have on places. If you get 1,900 extra citizens, the population of Fort City is in real numbers is declining. Like a lot of rural communities, it's declining. But if you got 1,900 extra people, you get money from the state. It's not just about political power, right? And some people have argued, oh, they're not voting anyway, right? They're disenfranchised. That's a whole, so this goes multiple directions. If we're thinking about the political power, we're not necessarily using their vote against them when they're in the prison, because they're in a black, like these towns are, some of these towns, like Fort City, is 66% black. So, and the prison is a third, a third, a third. It messes up sex ratios in the town because it's all men. And 94% of prisoners are men. So that's the other part of this, is it messes with sex ratios. It goes, there's a whole, I have to get into microdata. That's why I was talking to Eason about this so much. I have to get into microdata to really be able to dig into the multiple ways. It's not just political power. It affects a lot of different aspects of communities. And this is why they're attractive to rural communities. So people, the literature on prison building is that they're bad for rural communities. And I did a very conservative estimate, lagging the prison opening, or the prison opening was 2 years prior than the effects on median family income, poverty, unemployment, and median home value, and I found positive effects. And I could actually back that up more and either measure those outcomes in the year the prison opens, or even before the prison opens. That would make more sense. Once prison construction is underway, it's going to have a positive effect. And I know I sound like some dude that may be advocating for prison building right now, but that's not actually what I'm doing. I'm explaining why they're going to be. We built 1,700 of these things. This is not, we're not going to snap our fingers and get rid of them. We built this footprint out. It took us 35 years. To undo this, you see what I was saying, after I wrote my book, I was really depressed. I was like, we're not undoing this, right? But I've been thinking about, well, what if we give them alternatives? What if there are alternative industries, right? what if we create new jobs in those areas? So that's the benefits and you asked about the politics of it. It goes, the prisoners and how they're counted, it's like, it shoots off in so many different directions. It's another benefit to the town, but if we're gonna reduce our over-reliance on mass incarceration, we're gonna have to figure out how to get rid of some of these prisons. I hope I'm not making you grab your head. Any other questions? I see a lot of people like, yes, I'll let, yeah, go ahead.
This was super interesting, thank you. And I have, I'm not sure I entirely understand the difference in the geography of private versus public prisons construction, and the connection of that to different sorts of incentives. Like I'm on board with the critique that the idea that the boom is driven by private prisons, that's empirically incorrect, and that the boom has actually been a lot driven by public prison construction as well. And so yeah, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how that connects to the different set of incentives. So like the political economies of these places, if it's about state legislatures that are making the decisions to basically open their arms to public prison construction versus private prison construction. Because it seems to me that if the proportion of slaves in 1870,
60, yeah.
If that predicts public prison but does not predict private prison construction, is that?
That's, I've thrown some other stuff in the analysis the last week, and even that's going away. I'm trying to work
The
it
public
out.
prison,
Public prison
Okay,
is
okay.
even becoming negative when
Yeah.
I control for manufacturing
Okay.
and some other things, so it's really like causing a lot of stress. But so this is not really, the proportion of slaves is not really, this is more of a corollary than a causal relationship. This is about the political economy of place and the historical legacy of racism in those towns. So I'm just trying to properly contextualize. You saw me, it seemed like I was doing a public talk, but a lot of the literature, you can't tell the difference between the scholarly literature, because a lot of these are scholar activists that are writing about prison building. You can't tell the difference between that and popular discourse. And that's why there's so much confusion about what we're talking, and that's why it takes so long to explain all that. So this is corollary. What I haven't tested yet, and what I have data set up to do is to look at private prison building, the predictors of private prison building versus public building. And I think what I'm going to find is even more disadvantage at the local level and higher inequality at the state level that would explain. That's what I think is going to happen. This is not as important. I'm just trying to tease out the relationship, given how we everyone keeps saying prisons are Jim Crow or slavery. And I'm like, I get why you say that, but, and they're all private. I get why you say that, but when, as a social, and as a former community organizer, I'm like, I get why you say that. But if we're gonna address the policies behind this, we can't keep having that conversation. If we're gonna address the policies, we need to come up with, we need to use social science in a way that's informative to change the policies behind prison building, because we're doing an incorrect analysis. It's based on that data.
I guess like the distinction that I wouldn't understand whatever slavery-related prison booming exclusively related to private industry. Like I would count, or I could imagine that would be a very different thing about public prison building. That's also tied to all that, right? So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I see that there is motivation for sure to different determinants for sure.
Your accent is telling me you weren't originally born
No.
here. Yeah, so this is there was a Series 1619 project
Yeah.
that wrote it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a taken for granted
Okay. Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
in this country. independent of like, I don't know, data. So that's why I like talking with and working with demography. So.
No, follow up a little bit. Even the new prisons being built today are evenly, it could be private and public, they're both building. Because the image that, it could be that maybe the public prison was built over time, but the new ones are primarily private. Isn't that not true?
No. So, and we also complain immigrant detention,
Yeah, so that's
jails,
about that, yeah.
immigrant detentions, jails, and prisons. So when we talk about mass incarceration, 1.6 million people are in prison. About 700 to 800,000 are in local jails, right? And so we look at these institutions, the punishment is all the same thing. They're very different. They serve
So
very
you
different.
have here, you have immigrant detention centers.
No. I have a student who just cleaned the data, and we're going to look at immigrant detention, private and public, the demography of those places, along with prisons and the demography of those places. We're doing it all in one paper because I want to look at how disadvantage matters across those different outcomes. And it's these are very different institutions. Very different institutions.
Yeah, so that's what I was wondering. So I was going to ask you about the changing composition of the population in prison with immigration. But
so that would be immigrant detention facilities, and that's clearly, like I have a paper, that's clearly a racial project. 90% of immigrants detained, above 90%, are from Central and South America. That's like clearly meant for Latinx folks. Like that's clear. We don't have enough time. That's a few days worth of stuff. I think we discussed some of this at dinner last night. You think this is depressing? We don't. I'll stay bright and sunny on this topic.
So you said, in many rural areas, these become the employers of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a competition among rural areas who gets these prisons?
Yes.
And I wonder whether that some areas and that the private sector also chooses areas differently than the public sector.
Well, so you see this little, there's an optimal point for percent Black. That's a whole other stream of papers that I've been trying to think about for a while, but I'll go back to this example for you. There has to be a pull. The local folk, the model that I set up with the white elites and Black middlemen, if the white elites and Black middlemen are not getting along, they're not getting in prison. And it can be Latinx folks locally, because all those prisons down along the border in Texas, those have a lot of Latinos, and also in California. If they're at war, the probability of them getting a prison goes down, because you know what? Somebody else wants this. And it does beat the hell out of the paper mill.
Can I follow up on this, because I'm just trying to understand how all this decision process works. So there is an announcement, we're gonna build a prison, and the communities apply for this, or what?
So
What is
like
the
the
whole
whole,
process?
that's what my whole book is about. So there's an RFP, request for proposal. They made a video and sent it into the Bureau of Prisons for city, the local chamber of commerce. They were competing. They had to get, they had to line up not only their mayor and city council, they had to get the county on board, they had to get state legislators, the governor, they had to get congressmen, they had to get U.S. senators. Actually, the name of the road heading out to the prison is after the former governor and U.S. senator, Dale Bumpers. It's called Dale Bumpers Road. So he was key in getting this, and it was actually it was a congressional effort. The senators took over, Dale Bumpers, and I'm forgetting the one from Mississippi, Yazoo City. Mississippi got a prison around the same time period because they worked together with who was in office at that time. Bill Clinton was the president. in 1997. And they worked with Bill Clinton, and they didn't get a regular old prison because or a private prison. They got the idea because Bill Clinton, when he was governor, sent an envoy of people on behalf of Alice Walton. You heard that name before? One of the richest women on the planet, member of the Walton family. She was looking to go into prison day beds. She was looking to invest in prison beds. And they went the first day, tell the story, the first day of the new Chamber of Commerce director's job, the secretary says, hey, Bill Clinton's on the line. He's like, whatever. And he picks up the phone, and it's Bill Clinton sending him Alice Walton's representatives to lobby him on getting a private prison. And they say, hey, we can do better than a private prison. We'll think about state prison. And then they organize all of these folks and the community. At the request for proposal, I talk about, I used records from the local paper. There were 300 people in the public hearing about the prison. Black and white, they described it as a revival. They had church around a prison kind. They had community unity. They were almost singing. They could have been singing. I was still like appalled as I'm reading this through the records. But yeah, they wanted the prison, make no mistake about it. And they were happy about it. Black and white people. Now once it came, that's different. I detail that. Because white people still, the white elite was saying this is the greatest thing ever. And the black folks who were also in poverty were like, is it? We still have a murder rate on par with Chicago. 4 people here get murdered every year, and 60 to 70 people return from the Department of Corrections every year to those few neighborhoods I showed you. So, yeah. It's that, I hope that, yeah, that they wanted the prison. Like, I'm still shocked and appalled that they.
Who owns the land for the private prisons? Is this like community land that they could?
That's a whole, I would have to go through deeds. I would have to go, it's not just private, it's public. About 11 or 12 people sold their land and they put together, they compiled tracts of land to get to prison. And they had to pay 11 or 12 individuals.
But this was a public prison.
That's a public prison. Yeah, we could do that. I mean, that's a whole project, but it will require somebody going through plat maps or something. I don't even know if all these places have digitized their plat maps and going through ownership records. If you got a comparative historical student that wants to look at that, good luck, because that requires probably going to some of these southern rural municipalities or county courthouses and going through maps. And I'd like to stay married, so I'm not doing any more of that. I've drugged my family across the country, and that's a dissertation project. Any of you interested in that?
Just a note about the census and the prisons. Some studies of the dispersion of the Latino population, I think they overestimated the dispersion to rural areas because they forgot to exclude the institutionalized population from the census data. So this is for students. Remember to
I don't have, this is why I always use this map. I don't know if it's bigger. So, where is it? It's not on here. No, it's not on here. Here, I gotta go back. This is so there were 97 Latinos in the town in 1990. In 2000, there were like several hundred. And they were the prisons down here, like it's the only mixed block group in the town. It's the only town. It was like blacks and whites and Latinos living together. When I first looked at the map, I was like, this makes no sense, because I've been all over this town. I don't know where this neighborhood is. And I was like, oh, I've been there too. It's crazy.
You forget to exclude institutions. I spoke.
Yeah, especially like the gender ratios get thrown off, racial composition gets thrown off. It's a demographic, prisons are a demographic nightmare. Yeah.
There was actually a request for proposals of how prisoners should be counted, should they be counted from where they were sent from or where they, and I think finally they decided not to change it for the 2020 census, probably because the address or where the people came from wasn't so easy to establish.
Well, they changed
So where
it
they
in
gonna go
certain
after this?
states. Louisiana changed it because it was throwing off
Yeah,
they're
but
in
national
parishes.
data didn't change, I don't.
Yeah, nationally it
Nationally,
did.
no, but maybe
They-
locally they have.
Yeah, locally they voted in the state of Louisiana about 8 years ago to change it because it was throwing off the count for how they were funding schools and parishes. So they had to change it. This is, yeah, it's a complete nightmare dealing with this. And there's so much hyperbole about it, that as well. We're not really clear on who's where. Yeah. Yeah, and there's more hyperbole about that. And I'm trying to get more people interested in this area because there's so many, like, what I've started, I'm only like at the tip of the iceberg for what's really going on in these
Because
places.
you can think about, for some analysis, you might want to have the prison population, I mean, consumption, how much it affects the wealth of the county, if it's an income or whatever.
Yeah,
Anyway.
lots of different measures. But yeah, I know you guys are on an hour tight. It's 58 minutes, 12:58. So I want to respect that. I think I told enough of the story. I showed you some data. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks a lot.